We hear you, Harry, in that you never believed in the defeated notion of a post-truth world, and I know that's true of everybody here today. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm Tina Brown. Welcome on behalf of me, my co-host, Editor-in-Chief Alessandra Galloni of Reuters and Durham University, represented by Glenn Whitehead, Director of Engagement. Hi, Glenn. When Harry died, I vowed to honor his legacy in the only way that he would have wanted, which is I started a fund with Reuters, Durham, David Thompson, and other generous friends to celebrate the practitioners of real, fearless journalism. And that's what Harry did all his life. He supported the courageous firebrands who speak truth to power and rattle indifference into concern. So we launched Truth Tellers, the Sir Harry Evans Investigative Journalism Summit last year. And by popular demand, it is now an annual rebel yell. May the 15th, guys, right here at RIBA. Put it in your diaries now. We are coming back on May the 15th. And we're going to have an extraordinary lineup on stage from Maria Ressa and the Nigerian Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka to Sir Don McCullum and the woman the tech bros fear, Kara Swisher, and Jeff Zucker, media player, or wants to be, and many rising stars who you will meet on May the 15th. I realize it's a glum time in media. There are fewer local newspapers in Britain since the 18th century. We're battered by disinformation and digital chicanery and the pervasive question every single day, what can we believe anymore? But what Truth Tellers did show us last year, and will show us again, is that for all the multiple headwinds buffeting the profession, journalism is humming with reinvention, ingenuity, astonishing courage, and sparkling new talent. This was made abundantly clear when I read the over 400 global applications for the Harry Evans Fund's other initiative, the Global Investigative Journalism Fellowship in his name. The fellowship offers 9 months working with Reuters investigations team in London and research access to Durham's academics. And the first Sir Harry Evans Fellow, Waylon Cunningham from Texas, was part of a Reuters team that just won a prestigious Polk Award for its reporting on Tesla. So that was a bullseye right out of the box. And I'm thrilled to announce that our second Sir Harry Evans Fellow today is here today, Rosa Furneaux. Stand up, Rosa. Rosa's incisive medical investigations for the Distinguished Bureau of Investigative Journalism made clear to all the judges that she possessed the kind of rigor and zeal that fueled Harry's insight reporters on thalidomide. So really bravo, Rosa. It's really wonderful that you're fellow number 2. Now there's a reason that the Truth Tellers Summit has been able to return as an annual event. We were very, very fortunate to receive the support of the extremely generous Postcode Lottery Group, whose CEO, Sigrid von Aken, is here today. Sigrid leads an organization that is a committed champion of many in the journalism field, including the Thomson Reuters Foundation, Bellingcat, the World Press Photo Foundation, and the Clooney Foundation for Justice. An incredible portfolio of brilliant organizations which Sigrid and Postcode support. It's really extraordinary. So if you want to learn more about their amazing work and who they sustain, you can pick up a booklet on the table on the way out. We're also immensely grateful for some other new supporters, the Sigrid Rousing Trust and the Ford Foundation, both staunch advocates for truth-telling. And thank you also to Deborah Turness, thank you, Deborah, and the mighty BBC for crucial support in making the live stream on multiple platforms possible at the summit. So all of you, thank you so much, because we need you and we love you. The assaults on the industry may be daunting, but Harry was always hopeful, and I know he would feel that way even now. He'd see the innovative opportunities that AI presents, not just the dystopian possibilities. He'd urge us to support photojournalism more than ever, as the horrific images from Ukraine and Gaza shock the world's moral center on a daily basis. And he would point to the fact that investigative journalism is the critical way to hold power to account, whether it be corrupt political leaders or Buckingham Palace. So I very much hope you can all join us in May to celebrate truth, not mourn its demise, because we can all, as he says, dig deeper. And now on to our program. James Harding, my dear friend, collaborator, co-founder and editor of Tortoise Media, is going to lead an august panel. Come on, James, where are you? And panel.
So what is the duty of a newspaper in those circumstances? Is it to keep up people's morale, or is it to do the much more difficult job, going against the grain of popular opinion and looking for the truth?
It takes balls to sit in front of a world leader and just hold them accountable.
Armed men storming a live TV broadcast.
Reuters video journalist Issam Abdallah was killed on Friday, October 13th.
When you say a lie a million times, it becomes a fact.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tina. For those of you who ever did a panel with Harry Evans, you'll remember it was a really bracing experience. So charming and so quick to get bored if you said things that were on transmit. And I hope we can channel a little of Harry. I remember the very first time I did a panel with Harry, it was in the middle of the phone hacking crisis. And everyone had said, don't do it. I was editing the Times at the time. And of course, Harry called, was completely charming, said, come and do this. We need to talk about this. We need, in the spirit of this and the spirit secret, the way in which you and David T are bringing everyone together, bring everyone together and talk about it. And of course, we get in the room, and then Harry says, surely you came at all of this much too late, much too lazily, and much too lightly. And that was my response, just a long, slow pause. So I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to ask our distinguished panel questions that are as piercing as Harry's, but I hope that we'll do, in the spirit of truth-telling and in the spirit of the conversation we'll hold in May, some truth-telling about the truth-tellers. Alessandra Galloni, but you'll know, the editor-in-chief of Reuters, has that extraordinary job of trying to edit everything from the future of AI, the future of capital in the financial system, and the photoshopping of the royals. You seem to be doing all of those things at once, Ali. It's great to have you here. Clive Myrie, people will know, I think one of the reasons why Clive is so respected by audiences, but by journalists inside the building at the BBC, is he's a person who can present the news, but he's been there. He's a person who goes there, is one of the most courageous and thoughtful and I think curious foreign correspondents of the BBC. And Caoilfhionn Gallagher, I was saying to someone this morning, you're better as a journalist meeting Caoilfhionn Gallagher over breakfast than you are in almost any other circumstances. Caoilfhionn is probably the most important KC in this country when it comes to trying to address journalists who are incarcerated either by states or organisations other than states. We're going to come, I hope, Caoilfhionn, to talk about some of the cases you're dealing with, not least Jimmy Lai. But I hope that what we'll do is we'll have a conversation for 20 minutes or so. I'd love to get any thoughts or questions. We'll do that at a rat-tat-tat towards the end and make sure that we're all out, as promised, well before 10. And let me ask you, in fact, I wanted to ask you and Clive a question to start with. Tina mentioned Ukraine and Gaza. And I suppose since we last met, Ukraine has become, if anything, a more challenging story to cover, and Gaza has become an entirely new one at a different scale. And I wondered, Ali, whether you'd kick off just by giving your view on how both of those have both challenged Reuters and potentially changed the way in which you think about the role of the news.
Sure. Well, first off, I will say that Harry used to walk around the Reuters newsroom in New York, and we had similar reactions, and he would sort of ask that question, the one question that we hadn't asked, in reporting something out. So we have a similar experience of Harry's greatness. Ukraine and Gaza. Well, I mean, the first thing, it goes without saying, but I think it's always worth repeating, is security, the security of our people on the ground. We learn a lot every time we have people with boots on the ground in places like Ukraine and Gaza. We work hard to, all of us, I mean, we at Reuters, but all of us do, to improve our security systems every day, right? We learn from what happens on the ground and we improve. And that is true not just for the people on the ground, but it is also for the people in the newsroom that day after day are looking at images that are extremely traumatic. And so we do a lot of work on the mental health of journalists. Certainly, again, those who are covering the conflict, you know, before, during, and after, but also those who are covering it in a different way. So security obviously is very important. But in general, what we learned, I would say two words come to mind: propaganda and precision. Propaganda in terms of you know, having to deal with you know, governments, institutions, military operations that you know, tell you one thing and you know, may or not be true. So throughout both of these conflicts, we've had to be ever more careful about verifying information. This is true in the industry in general. I mean, Deborah here, obviously, at the BBC, as BBC Verify, we've all had to become better at doing that. There has been a lot of propaganda on all sides, and so we have to be very careful. But related to that, excuse me, is precision. We have had to be much more precise with language, with context, and in particular in the conflict in Gaza. You know, this is a conflict, as we all know, that has been very you know, traumatic, that has caused much debate and much emotion in many, many newsrooms inside. And our journalists are really holding our feet to the fire. Our editors are, as to the context that we give, the language that we use, how we frame stories, how we frame images. And every day we have to look at what we do, examine it, see where we can do better. And that is, you know, it happened in both conflicts, and it's really important. And I'll say one last thing. To me, it is also emblematic, and it shows how important diversity is in newsrooms. And that is diversity of thought, diversity of race, diversity of religion, all sorts of diversities. We at Reuters, in a sense, are very lucky because we operate in so many places around the world. We publish in 16 languages, we speak in 150 languages, and we have reporters in countries who are from the countries that we cover. And again, as ever, they are the ones, it's our reporters who every single day write to us. The number of letters I've received, like many editors, I think, of newsroom, letters, emails saying, you didn't do this right, this headline was not right, this didn't actually capture it. So that's how newsrooms are changing as a result of these conflicts.
Yeah. Clive?
Fundamentally, good journalism is emanates from having someone on the ground who you trust, who's telling you the story. The bottom line is, I am banned from covering the Ukraine-Russia war on the Russian side. I was a signatory with a lot of other journalists to an open letter to Israel and to Egypt to try to get access to the war zone that is Gaza. So at the moment, I can't go to Gaza. These are fundamental barriers on the public's understanding of what is really going on. I'm still allowed into Ukraine, which is good, although a message was put out on Facebook towards the end of last year that said that Clive Myrie, BBC journalist, has been beaten up by racist thugs in Ukraine. This was on Facebook. I get a message from relatives in Jamaica saying, we've seen this. Is it true? We knew they were Nazis. From friends all over the world, we've seen this. Is it true? Is this what's happened? Perhaps what Putin was saying is right about the racism and the far-right elements within Ukrainian society. So the Russians are trying to stop me or somehow make it difficult for me as a journalist, independent journalist, to report from Ukraine. And it strikes me that that is one of the biggest barriers to fully understanding what's going on in our world, fully understanding the truth of a particular situation, is preventing journalists telling the story themselves.
Clive, can I say one practical thing on that? Do you think we're doing enough to try and work out how to get access to Gaza? What leverage Western news organizations can have on particularly Western governments around that access?
True. Yeah, I mean, we've been trying since the war started.
I know, but we're writing open letters. I mean, there's a different level we could go to, couldn't we?
Well, what, to Mr. Netanyahu?
I mean, there's a question, there's a group of people in a room here that could think to themselves, well, how would you put pressure on the United States and on the UK governments and on European governments to say you need to make access conditional to some of the aid and support you're giving?
And do you believe anyone would listen to that?
I think that, well, I'm glad we're having this private chat.
Yeah.
I think that the non-reporting of Gaza is contributing to the division of understanding in this country and communal division. Yeah. So I think it's relevant to the circumstances and the way in which the story is being understood here.
But I just want to say there is reporting from Gaza. I mean, we have
absolutely right.
We have had 8 people. We have 8 staff reporters in Gaza, and you know, you talk about going in. It's very, very difficult to get people out. So you know, and the BBC is in the same position. The AP, basically, the BBC, the AP, AFP, and us. You know, we have staff reporters in Gaza. We've had it from the beginning, and it has been incredibly difficult to get them out because initially, I mean, I'll speak for our reporters, they said, this is the story of our lives, we want to stay in. Month 1, month 2, month 3, not being able to feed their families, their children, coming up, their homes destroyed, and they want to come out. And we've been able to get 6 out thus far. But so there is reporting from there. It's just that it's constricted. It's those who are there have to stay there and can't come out. Those who want to go in can't come in. And by the way, it's not just journalists, because I feel like in what's happening in Gaza, we can talk about journalists, but there are, you know, 2 million people, you know, who have been wanting to get out. You know, not just journalists, but many people who want to get out and who haven't been able to.
Clive, I'm coming to you in 1 second, but can I just touch on one other thing, Clive? I confess that the extent to which, particularly in this story, particularly in the coverage of Israel and Palestine and the war in Gaza, the efforts to discredit or delegitimize news organizations has been an acute problem, something that we'd seen a long time in the United States, felt like it was coming here. There was a piece written yesterday by Michael Ellis, the Attorney General, appointed by Boris Johnson, former Attorney General, saying, awful as it is to admit it, the BBC appears to be institutionally anti-Semitic. And I read it and thought, awful as it appears to admit it, Michael Ellis doesn't know what he's talking about. The idea that someone in that position, the Attorney General, tries to label or smear the BBC as anti-Semitic, I think is, as you can hear in my voice, an absolutely disgraceful thing to do, and a very dangerous thing to do for journalists, and divisive in our own country. And I say that as a Jewish person who spent 5 very happy, proud years working at the BBC. But you're clearly dealing with this a lot, being kind of, even before you open your mouth, being deemed to be one thing or the other. How does a news organization itself explain its processes and win the support of its audiences?
It's tough. It's tough. You know, the BBC's, you know, I hope, deserved reputation for honesty, for truth, for due impartiality. You know, it's been built up over a long, long time. And one conflict is not going to completely shatter that. But this is a difficult media age in which we live. People want their own truths. They want to be told what they want to hear. They don't necessarily want impartiality. And that is very, very difficult. You know, we have BBC Verify. We have a part of the BBC that we hope the public and the rest of the BBC can trust in terms of the information that it verifies, that it checks, that it looks at. And we hope that that is part of the process in making people understand that we're doing everything we can to get across the truth of a particular subject to those people who who pay the license fee and do tune in. But
does it inhibit, do you think, the journalism that you do? The labelling on one side or the other?
No, absolutely not, because you continue to do what you know is right, what you've been trained as a journalist to do, which is to look at all the sides of an argument and give due weight to those arguments and put it all together. I mean, I was utterly shocked by the debate over terrorism and terrorist and so on. Not just at a local level with someone on Twitter saying, why aren't you calling them terrorists? From the president of Israel. I mean, you'd think you'd have something better to do. And that's what was shocking to me.
Yeah. Can I just add something on this? I mean, we're entitled to expect better from our political leaders. And you've got a situation where the UK speaks out of both sides of its mouth on press freedom issues. So on the one hand, the UK since 2019, along with Canada, has been one of the lead countries in the Media Freedom Coalition and makes great play of the work that's being done with the National Action Plan for the Safety of Journalists. And on the other hand, you have people in positions of power causing risks to journalists. I mean, this isn't an isolated example, the one you've raised with Clive. Look at what Kemi Badenoch did a number of years ago, where she incited a pile-on a female journalist of colour, Nadine White, at precisely the same time that the UK was developing its National Action Plan for the Safety of Journalists. And it is high time that we call political leaders out when we do that. This is close to the Trump calling journalists enemies of the people position. And that's why we end up in a situation where you have journalism and journalists being denigrated and there being a lack of trust in journalism.
Keelan, I appreciate the way Tina framed things. This is difficult, demanding times, and trying to keep our eyes focused on optimism and innovation. Let's come to the optimism and innovation in a moment, because I think one of the other themes of this year has been what's happened to the great truth tellers, Alexei Navalny, what happens to Evan Gershkovich, Jimmy Lai. I mean, Jimmy Lai is a complicated person, but you lead the international representation for him. How should we understand what's happened to him and what that represents?
Of course, and I'm pleased that you've raised him in the same breath as Navalny. I mean, we have Bill Browder here, who's done such an incredible amount of work to hold Russia to account. But what's happened with Navalny is deeply shocking. We also currently in Russia have a British man, Vladimir Kara-Murza, incarcerated for being a truth teller, for speaking truth to power. In Hong Kong, we have a British man, Jimmy Lai, aged 76, who is in prison. Let's not dress it up. He is essentially charged with conspiracy to commit journalism. That's why he's there. Anyone who's been following the trial can see the allegations made against him, which are described as sedition, terrorism, are things like, you as owner of a newspaper contacted Lord Patton or arranged for Lord Patton to be contacted, the last governor of Hong Kong, to ask if he would write an opinion piece on an issue of public interest, the protests in 2019-2020. And that's presented as being criminal. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing what is happening every day in a Hong Kong courtroom against a British man. Just today, we've had a witness giving evidence, Andy Lee. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Dr. Alessadra, has made clear that there are credible allegations that he was tortured in mainland China. And that comes from brilliant journalism too. Shabani Matani at the Washington Post, who published a piece on the 17th of December, the eve of the trial, after a one-year investigation by the Washington Post, showing that Andy Lee had been essentially kidnapped from waters outside Hong Kong, brought to a Chinese prison in Shenzhen, tortured there, coerced to give evidence against a British man, against Jimmy Lai, and he is now taking the stand. And this is a situation which the UN has called out. We have yet to see the UK robustly speaking about this, and also we've yet to see this being a front-page story. I appreciate there's other key issues at the moment, including Princess Kate.
And Keelan, how do we understand? and how do we understand what's going on? Because of course, with Evan Gershkovich's cases, with Alexei Navalny, we do focus on individuals. Yeah. But the Jimmy Lai case is essentially the shutting down of a news organisation. When you look at it globally, is something shifting in the way in which people are trying to control the press?
Absolutely, and I think you will have heard Maria Ressa's words there. So I lead with them all, the international legal team for Maria Ressa too. And with Maria Ressa, with Jimmy Lai, and with Jose Ruben Zamora in Guatemala, and with others, we're seeing what I consider to be a very worrying trend. So rather than autocratic leaders simply going after one individual journalist or picking off journalists one at a time. They're trying to shut down an entire ecosystem. So you go after Jimmy Lai, you shut down Apple Daily, because remember the printing presses for Apple Daily, hugely popular newspaper in Hong Kong, and the only pro-democracy, anti-corruption newspaper in Chinese language, which was speaking truth to power in Beijing. That's all been shut down. So it's not just arresting a single man, it's shutting down an entire news organization and sending a chilling message to any journalists in Hong Kong: keep silent or you'll be next. That's the same attempt that happened with Maria Ressa in the Philippines. So it wasn't just a message to Maria, it was a message to her organization, Rappler, and it was a message to any journalist in the Philippines who dares to speak truth to power. And we have the same thing then in Guatemala with Jose Ruben Zamora, incredible man who founded El Periodico. So going after these founder, editors, owners of media organizations is a new tactic and a very worrying one.
Forgive me, I'm going to go for something of a gear change, if I might, Ali, which is, someone once said to me, we should fear what we want more than we should fear what we fear. And I'm intrigued by this debate around AI in journalism. I suspect you're probably closest to it of all of us. I know that Thomson Reuters has committed, I think, 100 million to investment and experimentation with AI. What's your read of what happens or what we actually see in journalism in the next, let's say, 2 years?
I mean, we could have a whole conference just on this, but I can tell you a little bit how we are thinking about it. So, first of all, it's an opportunity. Right? AI is an opportunity, and I'm on the way Harry would think about it. You know, I think if harnessed properly, why is it an opportunity? The way we see it is that different AI tools can help us in our reporting, can help us in our processes. You know, as a news agency, we deliver a lot of information, very, very important information, to a lot of other news organizations around the world that then use that information to create their stories. If there is a way that we can improve the way we both gather that information and deliver it, then that's a win-win. And we think that AI tools can help with that. I think the key point is you have to introduce these responsibly. And the way we're thinking about it is oversight, so that we are going to have human oversight over any story that is created with generative AI. We are not touching anything image-wise, so photography and the like, thus far. We are going to be responsible and accountable, so we're not going to say if you know, we automate something and you know, there's a mistake in there, we're not going to say blame the machine. No, blame Reuters. We are accountable for it. And we're going to be transparent, so that whenever we do use, especially Gen AI tools in creating or publishing or distributing our news, we're going to be transparent about the fact that this is a tool that we used. So bottom line is, it's an opportunity, and I think especially for those of us who really deal with a lot of information and a lot of news, it's an opportunity to help us and to free up our journalists to do more you know, value-added and ambitious work. You know, it will free up many hours for people to divert and go out and report, go out and do, you know, meet people in corridors to get, you know, great investigations and to get great news. But it has to be used responsibly.
Can I just, I want to make sure we get some time for sort of questions and thoughts. I'm going to just finish up with one final thought for Clive and Keelan. You'd be forgiven for thinking in 2024 that most journalists are spending time writing stories about the dire state of journalism. You know, there's just been this run since the start of the year about problems in the journalism business, and understandably you can see either people shouldering colossal losses, people wide open, taking on new businesses at kind of loss-making multiples. I just wondered, Clive, from your point of view, when the landscape of the business of news changes around the BBC, when it looks like there's either going to have to be more public provision for journalism, or you're going to see either charities and NGOs stepping in to fund it, or billionaires stepping in to fund it. What do you think happens to the nature of journalism itself? How does the business of, you know, to Tina's phrase, truth-telling, change?
It's a good question. It's difficult for me because I've been in the BBC my whole life. And you know, there's a level of funding there that has allowed the BBC to continue the work that it's been doing for 100 years in a way that, commercial enterprises have had, it's waxed and waned in what they've been able to do. And perhaps there is more of an element of commercial enterprises having to be a little bit more cognizant of the market out there in a way that perhaps the BBC hasn't. I think when it comes to the state of journalism in the modern age, actually I think it's because the mainstream media, those organizations like the BBC that have been around for a long time, I think it's the fact that they are trusted still by a majority of people that actually means they're dangerous. It's precisely because we are an organization, and I would suggest this for ITN, my colleagues at Channel 4, Sky and CNN, it's precisely because people do come to us because they know that we've got a verified, an organization within that verifies everything, that we attribute stuff, that we check, we double check, we have correspondence on the ground where we can. It's precisely because of all that stuff that legitimizes what we do that we're a danger. And it's why you're getting more work, frankly, because malign actors know people trust us.
Keelan, will you just give your view on that? You've talked a bit about state oppression of responsible journalism.
Yeah.
There is a well-funded freedom of speech, quote-unquote, freedom from fact version of the news. That also presents a challenge, doesn't it, to responsible journalism?
Yeah, very much so. And actually, what Maria Ressa calls it quite often is astroturfing, the fake grassroots, so the distribution of a false narrative, which often causes real issues for journalist safety too. I mean, just by way of example, I act for a number of Iranian journalists who are based here. So they're UK nationals, they're based here, they're dual nationals for the BBC News Persian service, but also for Iran International, facing very serious, credible risks to life here in the UK. I mean, last year, early in the year, it was announced by Tom Tugendhat, the security minister, that there'd been 15 credible threats to the lives, so credible threats to life or threats to kidnap journalists and other activists on UK soil in the previous 13 months. That's more than one a month. Yep. And actually, one of the things that I see quite often when dealing with journalist safety issues facing trans-border threats is it's combined with this astroturfing and a false narrative. So you get, for example, with the BBC, hashtag Ayatollah BBC. So at the same time that they're being targeted cross-border by the long arm of the Iranian state, there's also a false narrative peddled, which is that they're in league with the authorities. And that becomes very difficult because it means journalists are fighting a war on multiple fronts. Maria Ressa has the same thing in the Philippines. So the disinformation, which we were talking about earlier, also becomes a real journalist safety issue. I mean, in the room, I see we've got my brilliant client, Paul Caruana Galizia, your colleague, and that kind of disinformation and the online abuse, which his mother, Daphne Caruana Galizia, was facing before she was outrageously assassinated in 2017, has got many similarities. It's not just autocratic states that this happened in. That happened in a Council of Europe country, a European Union country, Malta. And it happened under our noses. And I can tell you, other EU states and other Council of Europe states did not hold Malta to account until after this happened. And then it was presented as a bolt from the blue, when in fact there'd been a climate of impunity for many years, with NGOs calling it out, individuals like Paul and his brothers and his family calling it out, and states not doing enough. And bottom line is, if we're taking truth-telling seriously and we're taking journalism seriously, states need to do more.
Thank you, Keelan. Views or thoughts or questions? Some people I know, some people I don't. So will you say your name, Rosina?
Thanks for saying it for me, James. Hi, I'm Rosina. I'm the CEO and Editor-in-Chief at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. I've got three sort of very broad questions, really. So the Bureau is the UK's largest non-profit investigative newsroom. We cover local to global investigations. Examples include we linked Abramovich to Putin with evidence for the first time. We reported on Qatar's hacking of the World Cup. We've been reporting on the human rights violations at Del Monte Farm in Kenya. And we spent 4 years reporting on Thurrock Council, which led to the resignation of the COO, the CEO, and the leader of the council, and led to government intervention. So I mean, in sort of real time, that's over 1,000 days of reporting. I guess my questions or observations are threefold. One is you asked a really good question about business model, and it's a question I asked at the Reuters lecture a couple of weeks ago, which is, why are we having to fight for sustainability? We are a non-profit, we're heavily foundation reliant. We're really transparent with our funding, that's not the issue. But in this current climate, when our work is really needed, why are we in this sort of situation? The second is around, I've been really interested in the focus on global reporting. Our work covers, probably a fifth of our work covers UK accountability, and there has never been a moment when the fight for UK accountability has been more needed. So council accountability, corporate governance, we have an enablers team that looks at the flow of dirty money through London. And the final is really just a point about diversity. I mean, I think, we need to be really thinking about sustainability will lead a better pathway for entry-level diversity, mid-level, and at senior level. I left the BBC a couple of years ago as a senior leader there. I've been really lucky or determined, but I don't see many people like me at senior level in this industry.
Rosina, thank you. I'm going to, Ali, Clive and Colleen, I'm going to take a few points at the same time. Other thoughts or questions people wanted to weigh in? Yes, sir.
John Arledge from the Sunday Times. The war in Israel and Gaza has caused all sorts of ructions around the world, and particularly in newsrooms and newspapers. We've seen it in America, we've seen it in the UK, all over the place. I just wonder whether you think this is an opportunity for senior editors to set out much more clearly the series of principles on which journalists have to operate and should operate, particularly on social media, and also maybe encourage people to not perhaps bring their whole selves to work, but just their professional selves.
Interesting. Anything else?
Hiya, Dominic Ponsford, Press Gazette. I just had a question, or an observation, picking up on a couple of things you said about sort of ecosystem and about the industry sort of lobbying for change. And I just wonder, with those two things, I wonder if we should focus a bit more on the sort of role of the tech giants, and whether, as an industry, we've sort of just become like a frog that's in a bowl of boiling water, and we've got to the point now where we sort of need to hop out and do something about it. Because you look at Google, Facebook, TikTok, they've got all the revenue, which used to fund journalism, and they also control the ecosystem, which used to fund journalism. So quality journalism on the open web is probably going to become extinct very soon because advertising can't fund it because of the actions of those tech giants.
Thank you. Should we have a go at those? I mean, heaven help us. I would direct the traffic, but you're going to answer what you want anyway. But you've got Rosina on business model, global reporting, and diversity in the newsroom. John on spelling out principles, particularly around social media use, and Dominic on tech giants. What do we do? Ali, go first.
Okay.
You can choose any one, and then by the time
pick and
exactly.
Yeah.
I'll take a crack at a couple on spelling out rules. So. This is our approach. Our approach is that we believe in free speech. So we're always very careful at sort of saying to our journalists, you can't say this and you can't say that. That said, what we try to explain to our reporters is, if you present a personal view, that it will inevitably impact your ability to report. So when you put yourself out there with a political view, a religious view, whatever view it is, you are no longer presenting yourself as unbiased, and that will affect what you do. So we have, in the past, told reporters who have given opinions about what they're covering that they can no longer cover that beat. But it's tricky because, especially in what is happening now with the war in Gaza, many of our reporters have been very deeply, deeply affected. Many of our reporters in Jerusalem have been deeply, deeply. Everybody in our bureau was affected by October 7th. Everybody in many reporters in the region now have relatives or friends in Gaza. We had a journalist killed in Lebanon. So it is normal, it is natural, which is why we have to try to explain rather than impose, and that's what we try to do. On business models, my boss's boss is here, so I need to tread carefully. But I will just say that, I'll say one thing. Our experience, we have a particular business model because, of course, we are a B2B business primarily. We provide news to other news organizations, and we provide news to a financial terminal. And in a sense, that protects us. We have a small part of our business, which we're trying to grow, which is direct to audience. Our experience, however, is that the closer you are to giving information that matters to people's lives, and this is particularly true, we see it in the financial world, right? You say something in the financial world and you are wrong and somebody loses a lot of money and they're never gonna come back to you. And that tells us something, right? And so you have to have a commercial, journalism has to have a commercial viability. And what we have seen, but again, we have a very particular business model, is that the closer you give information that really matters to people, the more that you have that sort of commercial success. Diversity, look, yes. And how many examples do we need of journalism failing because the journalists inside newsrooms don't understand or don't reflect the world that they're covering? So again, it's not just we're doing it because it's a good thing to do. We cannot be journalists around the world and inside countries if we don't have journalists that are part of the worlds that we are covering. So I can only but say yes, and it's an effort that has to continue. There was a fourth. I'm going to ask
Clive. Clive, actually, I'm going to ask you particularly because this, as Deborah knows, that we've dealt with this for a long time. The person of the journalist in the newsroom, on screen and on air, and then in social media, and the really deep question of how much you bring yourself to work, and then I'm going to ask you to try and deal with the tech giants question.
I personally, I have never had any problem walking into the BBC, whether it's television centre, broadcasting house, new broadcasting house, and shedding everything that I have in my head about Keir Starmer, about Rachel Reeves, about Rishi Sunak. I vote like everybody else, right? I have opinions like everybody else. I am not a political eunuch, okay? I have ideas and thoughts and processes, but I have never once had a problem walking into the BBC and shedding all that because I know that is my job. Now, I know it's, we live in an age where, you've got to get your feelings out there and your emotions, and people do feel passionately about what's going on in Israel and Ukraine and Gaza and Haiti and wherever else. But we're professionals. We should be professionals, and we should be shedding those personal elements of our lives if it affects the work that we do. And I've never had a problem with that. Never had a problem at all. And fundamentally, the BBC's longevity, the future of the license fee, its credibility depends on journalists who are impartial and who can show due impartiality when dealing with very, very complicated issues. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be there. It's as simple as that. Go and work for, I don't know, for some tech titan, because, they will want your opinion. No one cares. Someone once said, opinions are like arseholes. Mm-hmm. Everyone has one. Mm-hmm. Opinions don't matter. My opinion, no one cares what I think about Vladimir Putin. Although last night, we had a very vigorous debate about how we get across to the public that this was a sham election, okay? Do we say, critics say, it was a sham election? Or yeah, exactly. Now, critics would, because they're critics. Opponents say, well, they would. The West says, well, it would. Maybe we should just say, any right-thinking person knows it was a sham. Blah, blah, blah. No, you have to attribute everything. And that is the only way we're going to survive, I would suggest.
I was just going to jump in, and do you think, obviously those who are of a slightly earlier generation than us,
yes.
Do they feel the same way?
I'm an old bloke.
Yeah, well,
I'm
you
an
and me
old
both.
bloke. That's the
I
thing.
find it's harder with it.
That's true, but then exactly what you were saying before. It's about education. It's about talking to these journalists. It's about saying, look, you know, our credibility is based on our impartiality. If we don't have any impartiality, or if we don't espouse impartiality, due impartiality, we don't have credibility. In which case, we're just another tech operation. We're just another voice out there. It doesn't matter.
For another time and for what it's worth, I don't think that orthodoxy is for free, in that trying to work out what you think helps get you as a journalist to what you do and don't know. And so how you run a news organisation that does encourage people to come in and share what they think before they get on air is really important, I think, in trying to get to what the story is, what the thread of the story is, what we don't know.
But that discussion is for behind the scenes. That discussion is in the newsroom.
Right.
That discussion is
It's
not
for
on air.
Got it. Okay.
Exactly.
So I'm going to try, because I know you're very tight on time, I'm going to try and just pull together something related to tech giants and something related to diversity. I agree with you, yes, 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 and I agree on diversity also that it's time to start recognising that it makes more business sense as well, because actually there's more leverage with that. I mean, all too often in my industry as well, you see people treating diversity as a tick box at the end, rather than something which is embedded in their culture and in the way that they operate. And one very specific example which troubles me a lot in relation to diversity currently relates to tech giants, and that is online abuse of women journalists, particularly women journalists of colour. And the phrase that was used by Dr. Julie Passetti, who did some brilliant work, that's a rather heavy hint, I think, from that side of the room. The phrase that was used by Dr. Julie Passetti, who did some brilliant work for UNESCO on safety of female journalists, was that female journalists are at the front line of journalism online. And you end up having a position where women, and particularly women of colour, who get so much of the abuse online, shrink back from those spaces, many self-censor, and that what you end up is you have a lack of diversity in women's voices. Now, that's a particular problem in certain other parts of the world, but what we have found in dealing with those issues is that we have not had proper buy-in on these issues as yet from the tech giants. Yeah, and it's critical. Look, I mean, I woke up this morning to, simply because I'm a lawyer acting for Jimmy Lai, so this is quite a far-out concentric circle. I woke up this morning to a hacking attempt on my bank account, a notification that there'd been a hacking attempt on my Chamber's email, and I woke up to 11 threats of rape or dismemberment online. So I have those. I can tell you I have been raising these issues for a long period of time with professional companies, with my professional regulator, with tech companies.
With the companies themselves?
Absolutely. So I mean, one of the things which happened to me last year, for example, was a series of fake emails went out purporting to be me, going to a range of people looking for privileged information, kind of privilege phishing. So going to people who are journalists, Hong Kongers living here, so purporting to come from me and asking them for information, which would have put them and their families at risk. And these came from Gmail accounts. We reported it to Google. I can tell you, it took a Labour shadow minister holding an event in Parliament to get Google to even engage. And that took 18 months. Now, this is not acceptable. And in
so that's very sophisticated. Privilege phishing is quite a sophisticated.
It is, and unfortunately we're seeing that increasingly. So when there was the reporting of the Chinese shadow police stations about a year ago, which operate across the globe, one of the NGOs, Safeguard Defenders, which had produced the report, received fake email purporting to come from me, offering my services pro bono, and asking them for information, and they fell for it. And of course people then hand over information which may place them at risk or their sources at risk. But that's an increasing problem that we're seeing. We've yet to get buy-in from tech companies to engage with it. Now that's an earlier stage problem than the bigger stage problem with the tech companies that the question asked. But it seems to me that's a low-hanging fruit and something we should be picking off, dealing with quickly, because it places journalists and lawyers acting for journalists and sources of journalists at risk every single day.
Glenn, thank you. Unfortunately, we have to call this to an end, but the truth is we don't, because happily we're meeting on May the 15th. And I was going to say one thing just before asking Tina to close this conversation this morning, which is, when I came in here this morning, I was struck by the fact there were a lot of people I haven't actually seen since I was at RIBA last year for Truth Tellers, organised by Tina. And it possibly tells you something about what you're doing, Tina, for us and for the media and for journalism in the UK, and in Harry's honour, that This is the only way that we get together to have conversations like this, that people who are the, you know, forgive me, I'm still a bit starstruck in my industry, the greats in our business get together, but also people who are new and are the coming generation of journalists and editors. And it's thanks to Truth Tellers that that is happening. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Alessandra Galloni, thank you to Clive Myrie, thank you to Caoilfhionn Gallagher for joining, but particularly Tina, thank you to you, because you're the driver of this thing, and without you it wouldn't happen.
Thank you, everyone. Clive, you'll never be a political eunuch, nor will any of you be frogs. I mean, speaking from the frog community here. It's been wonderful to see all these faces here, actually, who are just so many great talents in journalism. It's very thrilling, very encouraging. And I love doing this because I'm such a passionate believer in journalism, as Harry was. I want to see it thrive. We need it. We have to be the truth tellers because we live in a world of, you know, just sleazy sham, and we must stand up for it. So thank you so very, very much, my great panelists, my great friend Alessandra and Clive, Caoilfhionn, darling James, everyone for coming. David Thompson, thank you so much for all of your support. Wonderful Sigrid von Aken, who is allowing us to come back, not just this year, but for the next 2 years. So thank you so much, Sigrid and the Lottery Group, and all of you here for coming. Thank you.